Welcome back to the ARKAST Podcast, a podcast where we talk to all of the podcasters around Arkansas usually, but today we have a very special episode. We're talking to some of the speakers of the upcoming ARKAST Arkansas Podcast Festival. And with me today is Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. Hey, Dave, how are you?
Oh, glad to be here.
I'm really glad that you're here. Could you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what the School of Podcasting is?
Yeah, the School of Podcasting, when I started back in 2005, it was funny, a friend of mine had said, hey, I think the next big thing is going to be podcasting. And I Googled it and there was 1.5 pages. I thought we broke the internet. And at the time they were saying membership sites are going to be huge. And then when I discovered podcasting, I was like, ooh, what if we put that chocolate and peanut butter together? And the School of Podcasting was born. So I've got online courses. There's a really, really cool community. And then you get unlimited coaching with me.
That's amazing. And you're pretty well known in the podcasting world, which is its own type of world, right? Like, yeah, we have our own celebrities. We have our own people that we know pretty well. I'd say that, School of Podcasting is definitely up there with that. So what made you, I guess, establish the School of Podcasting in the beginning? I know that you had this idea of combining these two things to offer something of value, but what was the real motivation behind it?
Yeah, it's my background's in teaching. I makes me sound ancient, but I used to teach people like how to surf the internet, how to send email because it was brand new. And I'd always seen things kind of come and like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. And then it passed me by. And so this friend of mine told me about podcasting. And at the time I was building websites for people and I had a website for myself. The other hobby I have is music. And so I had a podcast, or I had a blog about how to get more gigs and sell CDs and things like that for bands. And so when I heard about podcasting, I finally kind of parted one together. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. So I launched my first podcast for musicians. And within probably 2 or 3 weeks, I got a voicemail from a guy named Michael Van Laar in Nuremberg, Germany. And he said, hey, Dave, I found the show and I'm like, did he say Nuremberg, Germany? Because I'm in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. And there's a guy on the other side of the planet that not only found my show, but liked it. And I just grabbed the flag and I said, I hereby claim podcasting as my official jam, because at the time it still does. It's kind of technical. It was a lot more technical back then, but you kind of have the technical aspect. You could be as creative as you want, and then you get to help people. And so that's the part. Those are the 3 things that really kind of scratch every itch I have. And I just was like, oh, this is the best. And the funny thing was, another reason why I started it is I was going back to school. My original degree was in electronic engineering, and I fell into training. And when I went to get another job in training, they're like, well, you don't have a teaching degree. So I started the School of Podcasting to be kind of a part-time job. And the problem is it was 2005 and there were not a lot of people looking to start a podcast. So I always say, don't start a podcast if the goal is to make money quickly. And that's exactly what I did, which is why I was also teaching guitar lessons, building websites for people. But that's what got me through school the second time. So that was another inspiration, but that's when I learned real quick. Oh yeah, if you don't have an audience, kind of hard to monetize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So you hit on something I was going to ask about, the reach of podcasting yourself. So it kind of excited you when you heard somebody was from Nuremberg. And so Arkansas itself, we are trying to figure out our relationship with podcasting, even though it's been a medium that's been around for over 25 years. It's still fairly new in its current state, I guess. It's reaching more people now than it ever has before. And we're trying to, most Arkansans who are interested in podcasting have heard of podcasts, but they're not really sure, what am I supposed to do with this? Or maybe I don't have an audience for this. And one of the things I think a lot of people miss is that it is not just limited to your immediate friends and family. Whenever you put an episode out there, it's not even limited to the state or of your country. It's out there for the world to listen to. And somewhere around the world, you're going to have somebody to listen to you. So what has that experience grown into? Because I know you've reached way more people than one guy out in Nuremberg, Germany since then.
Yeah, it's kind of odd because like I'm in a spare bedroom, talking to nobody most of the time. And the minute I announced I was going to be at this event, I had somebody email me, hey, I just heard you're coming to Bentonville. like, do you need a ride from the airport? And it's just weird.
Wow.
Well, it's very nice, but there's a party, like, you forget that people are listening. So that's the thing. And the whole, is anybody going to listen to me? That is absolutely natural. I think it's kind of built into most people. Last time I researched this, it was around 80% of people have what's called imposter syndrome. And my favorite example of that is Garth Brooks, Mr. Tennessee guy, goes to New York City to do a concert. He's like, nobody's going to want to listen to country music in New York City. And they gave him like some sort of like most successful single, country guy ever kind of award. So that's pretty cool. But he's playing Central Park and he looks at it and it's, football fields long. And he's like, nobody's going to show up. So he closed all of his curtains and just sat in his hotel, just waiting to be humiliated. And so finally, somebody came up and they handed him a piece of paper and they're like, Garth, this is the count from 20 minutes ago. He's like, you're telling me there's 980,000 people out there? And he's like, no, Garth, I'm telling you, there are 980,000 people there 20 minutes ago. So the whole time he was convinced that nobody's going to come see his concert. And by the end of it, he was close to 1 million. So it's really one of those things that I always kind of laugh and I say, whatever your parents or whoever told you, to shut up and sit down and be still, that gets ingrained in our head. And if you got something to say, absolutely start a podcast.
For sure. Yeah. And so we tell people all the time, whenever we have these, workshops, the most common question that we get, no matter what the subject matter is I have an idea, but I'm not sure that anybody's going to listen to anything I have to say. And something we really harp on is that there's a quote out there where, great stories happen to people who tell them, but that's not to say that, great stories don't happen to everyone. It's just that those people put action into it and they told the story. That's all you have to do. Nobody has a beginning like you do, a middle like you do, and nobody's going to end the way you are. So being able to present that story, somebody's going to be out there and they're going to be drawn to it. They're going to get value and they're going to be helped by whatever it is that you put out there. So you being in a spare bedroom and recording most of the time, I think that's another barrier to entry that we feel like we have to overcome lots of times when we're starting a podcast, is the technical issue. We think it's way more technical than it actually is. So what do you have to say for anybody that wants to start a podcast and they don't know where to even start technically?
I would say start right here. This is, I'm holding up a Samson Q2U microphone. It's $69. And the microphone I'm talking into right now is $200. This is a Rode PodMic USB. Usually I have a Shure SM7B, which is like $400. It's insane. Don't go buy Shure SM7B. This one will do just fine. And what's great about it is you can plug it directly into your computer via USB, or if you later get an interface, it'll work. So it'll kind of grow with you. And for $69, it's a steal. It's an amazing microphone. So if you're doing a solo show, $69 and you're in, and you're like, well, I want to have a co-host. Well, that's where you get the Zoom PodTrack P4. And this thing is the Swiss Army knife of podcasting, because you can plug 4 mics into it at the same time. So if you're doing a panel, or if you take one of these out, you can plug it into your computer and record a Zoom call. So now I got 3 people in the room with me and somebody on Zoom. Well, somebody calls and says, well, I can't make it. Any chance you can patch me in via phone? Yes, you can. So they could be channel 3 on a phone. We got 4 channel 4s on Zoom, and the 2 other people are there. It's amazing. And then you're like, but Dave, what if I want a podcast from the woods? Yes, it runs on batteries if you want it to. And this is $200. And so I realized $200 and $69 for the mic here. Let's just call it $300 to make it easy. And people are like, man, it's $300. Yeah, but if your child came up and said, hey, I want to start playing video games, I need an Xbox, you're probably going to sneeze away $300. And so to me, you don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars. You can get started for pretty much the price of an Xbox.
Absolutely. And being able to have that amount of technology at your hands, it was such a low price. I mean, $300 is $300, but I mean, it's, for most, it's not a ton of money, right? Especially if you're passionate about it. And so we hit a little bit about, if you're trying to start a podcast in order to make a quick, income, it's probably not going to happen. So that $300 might not come back to you all of a sudden. But if you have your goals, I guess, what would you say about, what are some quick goals that they could aim towards, that they could hit?
Well, it kind of depends on why you're starting. That's one of the first things you have to figure out is, why am I doing this? Because it could be, I just want to talk about Batman in the basement. And then the minute you put the first episode out, congratulations, your show's a success. You're talking about Batman in the basement. But if it's to, position maybe you're doing it for your company and you just want to keep your brand out there. So you do a bunch of short shows, just so you can keep saying your website. That's fairly easy. Maybe you want to position yourself as an expert, well, okay, now I'm going to do a solo show, but I'm going to do a deep dive on topics. So, I always tell people, I'd made a show once called The Worst Podcast Ever, and I just did every mistake. The audio was horrible. I was screaming. I was swearing like a sailor, and I still got 13 downloads. So I tell people, if you're getting less than 13 downloads, come talk to me, because you're doing something that's, probably some low hanging fruit there to fix. But I always tell people, you have to determine what your why is, because there are going to be those days that you're like, oh, time to make the podcast. And then you just don't feel like it or whatever, and when you remember your why, that really comes into play. And when you get the occasional email that says, hey, I just listened to this episode, thanks so much, that was really helpful, put those in a folder somewhere, save them in Gmail or something, so you can go back and go, oh yeah, that's why I'm doing that. So it's, but people talk about, if we're talking specifically about monetization, and nobody wants to hear this, but what I wrote a book about monetization. When I interviewed all these different podcasters, I would say, how long did it take to start making, more than a Mountain Dew fund? And the answer I got the most was 3 years, sometimes 2, but it was somewhere closer to 3. And when somebody's starting a podcast and they want to make money now, and you tell them 3 years, now, of course, there's always, things that break the rule. But if you think about it, I have a sign behind me that says plan, start, grow, and monetize. And a lot of people plan and start and want to go right to monetize. And I always tell people, you can't monetize dust. You have to get those people in the door to listen first.
Absolutely. And so you said that you started an intentionally bad podcast. Was that just to test out?
Yeah. I was like, because people would say, hey, I'm getting X amount of downloads. Is that good? And I was like, and that's, if I'm doing a show called Hey, We're All Fat, there's a huge audience for that. But if I do another show called, I don't know, the Pygmy Pony Show, well, if I get 300 downloads an episode for that show, that's amazing, because how many people have pygmy ponies? But if I get 300 downloads for the Hey, We're All Fat show, that's probably pretty disappointing. And it's one of those things I see people do when you start comparing your show to others. It's just going to just suck the life out of you. And so I always say, just focus on your audience, go back to your why. And, instead of worrying about how many, don't be the show. This is my new bumper sticker. Don't focus on how many downloads. Don't try to be the most downloaded show. Try to be the most talked about show. Because if you're the most talked about show, the downloads are going to follow.
That's a great point. Yeah. So you've seen podcasting grow, you said 2005, you started this. It's grown in many different iterations since then. Where do you see podcasting going from now forward?
That's a great question. It's hard to say, because it could go one of two ways, and it's probably going to do a little bit of both. I see with more money rolling in, I see some shows that are getting big, and they're just cramming them. And I mean, just with a shoehorn, cramming them full of advertising. And that makes me kind of sad, because radio puts about 30% of their content as ads. And one of the reasons podcasting is so great is it's not radio. So let's please not turn podcasting into radio. So I see that, and that's the big networks and things like that. So we're going to have that. But I also see where I think the independent side of this, the people that are doing it for the passion or for their company, and they're not worried about getting large numbers. They're worried about getting the right numbers. I want the people that need this, and that. So the chameleon breeder, that's an actual podcast. That guy's never going to get 10,000 downloads, but the people that listen are people that have chameleons, and they're trying to breed them. So he's got the right people listening to it. So I think we're going to see kind of a split with kind of two different camps that way. And we'll see how that works, because I know, especially if a celebrity gets a podcast, like actually somebody you've heard of, and you go listen to their show, and it's just ad after ad after ad. And I'm like, I just want to scream at them. There's a great documentary on Amazon called Corporate FM. and it goes over the history of radio and how they really just ruined it. And they quit trying to grow the audience of radio and instead just said, okay, we got this many people. How can we do it cheaper? How can we do it with the least amount of effort? Which I get, we want to be efficient, but it was just like, how much money can we wring out of this stuff? And I mean, I live in Cleveland, well, near Cleveland, Ohio. I'm in Akron, and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and stuff. And the radio here is just hideous. It really is. So
that's incredible. What somebody that people often reference whenever they're coming to one of our workshops and talking about how they want to start a podcast, even if they're very enthusiastic that they are going to have a successful podcast. They're working on it. They know where they're going after. And the goal is Joe Rogan level. That's who they always reference.
I have a video on YouTube and it's like how to make a podcast like Joe Rogan. And the step one is like, okay, in 1989, start a comedy career. And it goes through all the stuff he did. And people think he just turned on a mic and like somebody handed him a giant check. And it's like, no. It was like 6 years of comedy before he cut his first like comedy record. Seinfeld, I think it was 9 different appearances over 7 years on the Tonight Show before he got his own show. And the Seinfeld show almost was canceled because it was so weird and different. And then once it finally caught on, but yeah, Joe Rogan is interesting. He's one of the few places you can actually have a dialogue these days, love him or hate him, but that's what's going on. And I think that's why people love that show. But there are so many people. I remember once I was at a meetup and I was talking to somebody about their podcast and they just said, yeah, we just go Rogan style. We turn on the mics and talk. And I was like, that I might do that with a celebrity, but for the most part, I always say a podcast is a conversation with all the boring parts cut out. Now, I think Joe's show could be a whole lot better because, especially when I used to listen to it, now it's video, but I used to just listen to it. And there'd be a big chunk of him going, oh, Jamie, put that up on the screen. Oh, look at that. Oh, no, look at him. Look at him. Oh, they're on the left. And I'm like, yeah, this does nothing for an audio show, Joe, just for the record. So yeah, it's, bless him. The guy's, he's not on a network. He's, it's a team of 3 or 4, I think, if that. And it just goes to show you that, again, don't try to be the most downloaded podcast, be the most talked about. And that's definitely Joe Rogan.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. They're definitely the most talked about and brought up. What are some of the interview styles that you would suggest going after, or maybe some I don't know, some instances that people can look at to model themselves after?
Well, there are interviews. The thing I always tell about interviews, because I see people that are like, do you have a pulse? If so, you can be on my show. And I'm like, that's not a good thing. It really starts with, we talked about, you need to know your why. You also need to know your who and be specific. So if I do a show for widows, well, there's a big difference between the 38-year-old widow that lost her husband in a car crash and the 87-year-old widow who lost her spouse to natural causes. So when you do that episode of like getting back in the dating scene, that's not going to work for some people. So you need to know your who. And then it's a matter of finding someone that can bring value to your audience. And when I do an interview, I do a lot of research on who this person is before I even ask them, because I don't want to waste their time and I don't want to waste my time. And so there is the conversation part. I've been doing this and it's fun, but it's more time consuming. And that's what time consuming. And that's what a lot of people call an NPR style or a narrative style. And this is interesting because I cut me out of it and I listened to their answer. And the one thing I was listening for is, where do they actually start to answer the question? Because there are times when you'll ask somebody a question and they'll give you a ton of backstory. And then they finally answer the question. Well, we don't need the backstory. We're not talking, rocket science here. So I'll grab all the answers that deliver value to my audience. And I use Hindenburg journalists. So there's a little like waiting room, a little clipboard on the side. And I'll drag those over there. And then I drag them back in the order I want to kind of tell a story, to grab their attention. And that's really handy. It's just time consuming. So there's that in terms of different interview styles. So I'm hoping to pull the curtain back a little bit. We had a little bit of a freeze up and I didn't hear the first part of the question. I just heard, what are different interview styles? So I'm hoping that's what you were looking for.
Yeah, definitely so. I was talking about, you said it works for Joe Rogan whenever he's able to, talk to a
Yeah.
celebrity. But if you're just, interviewing an average real estate agent in your town, you know what I mean? It may not be as interesting of a conversation, what they think about dogs or whatever.
Exactly. And my bumper sticker for that is it's not the size of the guest that brings the value. It's the size of the value that makes the guest. I remember I was at an event and I heard this guy talk, and his name's Glenn Hebert. He runs the Horse Radio Network, and everything he said was like, holy cow. And everything's blowing up, and he had no idea what Apple was. Like, he's like, what's iTunes again? I was like, holy cow. But he was just crushing it. And so I immediately said, I need to have you on my show. And he became kind of a celebrity in a little bit. Can you hear that? Unfortunately,
I can a little bit.
I'm sorry. Edit point 2.
You're good.
It's my lovely Amazon Alexa letting me know the weekend's starting in 5 minutes. And I'm trying to sit here and hit the stop button. I just unplugged it. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Let me go back to Glenn. So Glenn, I get him, and I bring him on my show, and nobody's ever heard of Glenn. He calls himself Glenn the Geek. But I had more people he's now a verb in my little bubble, because one of the things he did is he went to the biggest horse show, like a convention, and said, I want to be the official podcast of this show. And they're like, what's a podcast? Because this was a while ago. He said, look, I'll do it. All I need is a table. I'll get myself there. I'll pay for my own hotel. So he did. Mm-hmm. And he set up little microphones and stuff, didn't record anything, but had a little banner made, and people came over, and he interviewed all of the different speakers. Well, he's growing his network. That makes sense. And then meanwhile, he's getting the audience like, you need to come to the horse show. This is the one you want to see. And then he talked to all of the sponsors about what they were going to be showing at the show and different products and stuff. And of course, all those sponsors went, wait, you're doing what? Who listens to this? Can I sponsor your show? And he said he still has sponsors to this day that he got from his very first trade show. So that's just an example of, at the time, Glenn was not some celebrity, but because he delivered value. I had a friend of mine recently, and he was talking about how he had this great opportunity fall in his lap. And I go, well, how did that happen? He goes, oh, I Glenn the Geeked it. I'm like, oh, you did the trade show thing? He goes, exactly. Worked like a charm. So as long as you're delivering value, that's really what your audience is looking for. Yeah, it's not always about downloads and advertising and things like that. I've gotten a few jobs from the job I work now at Libsyn.com. I got that because of my podcast. I got hired at a college when I was doing the teaching thing, because they asked me, what are your hobbies? And I said, podcasting. And they're like, you know how to podcast? And that got me the job. So it's always interesting how, and I also think a side effect of it is you get used to being able to handle the curveballs of life, because technology is not always your friend. And when things go sour, you go, that's all right. Hold on. We'll just figure this out. So I know I was at a wedding, and the pastor that married the couple apparently didn't come to the reception. And so the bride knew me, and she knew I went to church, and she's like, Jackson, you like to talk, get up there and say something, do a prayer for the food. And I was like, okay. So you get used to just being able to wing it. I guess it's a skill that just inherently, comes your way.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I guess for the ARKAST that's coming up, we're really excited about having you. We're glad that you were able to make it and that the date was open. It's crazy how magically the people that we want are able to show up and be willing to come to Arkansas of all places to be able to speak about, the podcasting. So there is quite a big podcasting community, especially in Northwest Arkansas. So this is the first attempt of trying to, connect with that crowd and help, as an industry grow better as a state. So what are some of the things that you're excited about in an event like this?
For me, I am going to an event where my target audience is. So what I like to do a lot is, as much as it's fun to talk, I like to go and listen. And like, I was at an event a while back, and 3 times I heard the word overwhelm. And I just made a note. I'm like, I should do an episode about overwhelm, because apparently it is. Anytime you learn anything new, there's that. So I'm looking forward to that. I always am humbled when somebody comes up and says, "Hey, I listened to your show." Because if you do that to me, I'm just letting you know I'm going to then grill you and say, "Okay, why do you like my show? What do you wish I would do different?" So I get to do impromptu listener surveys. That's always kind of fun. And just the one thing I love about podcasting is I've been in other, when I was a musician, some other bands wouldn't play well with other people. I don't know any podcaster that we all just want the same thing. We want to kind of serve our audience. We want to help each other. And so there isn't this whole kind of competition thing that I see. And that's the part I really love. It's just a great community. It doesn't matter where I'm at, what state. It's always amazing just when podcasters get together and like, wait, who do you use for merch? Oh, wait, what's that? And what's the better thing? And this and that. So we're all comparing notes. And the beauty of it is not once do we have to explain what a podcast is. Everybody knows. So that always helps as well.
Exactly. Well, Dave, we are really looking forward to having you on September 21st at ARKAST in Northwest Arkansas. So we'll be at the Meteor Guitar Gallery in Bentonville, Arkansas. You said it was exciting because you saw that there was a Walmart there.
Yeah, I'd never been to this city before, and I was like, you hear Arkansas, and if you're, a stupid kid from Ohio, you're like, is it just nothing but cactuses? What's in Arkansas? So I'm gonna find out on the 21st. I'm looking forward to it.
It's funny that was your touchstone because that is the birthplace of Walmart. That's where Sam Walton started his first store.
Nice.
You're like, that's how I judge it. Interesting. Well, Dave, if people want to keep up with you, because I'm sure that they do, how do they do that?
Yeah, the best place is schoolofpodcasting.com. That's the primary show about podcasting. I do have a number of shows. And if you want to check out all things Dave, Power of Podcasting has all my shows and my book and everything there. That's kind of more of a link tree kind of thing, but that's the only reason I use that is if somebody goes, well, where can I find all of your stuff? I'm like, oh, that's at powerofpodcasting.com. Pretty much everybody goes to schoolofpodcasting.com.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Dave.
Oh, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this. And, if you haven't bought your ticket yet, buy your ticket. It's going to be a fun time.
This episode of the ARKAST Podcast is brought to you by NPR affiliate stations KUAR in Little Rock and KUAF in Fayetteville in support of ARKAST, the annual Arkansas Podcast Festival running from September 1st to the 21st. Find more information and tickets at arkansaspodcasters.org. That's arkansaspodcasters.org.